In the early hours of December 26, 2025, shortly after 1:40 a.m., behind the Russian line, a rear area corridor roughly 20 kilometers from the front line began to move. This was not an assault axis, but the relocation of a command post, the coordination center for the entire sector. The convoy rolled out in radio silence. Lights off, no transmissions. On the ground, they believed they had disappeared, but above them, the sky was being red in heat. On Ukrainian infrared screens, engine compartments and auxiliary generators stretched into a continuous trace, slow but unbroken. On the operational map, a marker had already been pinned in advance, command post relocation. This was not a discovery. It was confirmation. This area lies deep behind the line of contact, roughly 18 to 25 kilometers back, commonly regarded as rear space, safe enough to hold tempo. In reality, the war here runs on operational rhythm, on time cycles precise enough that a slip of only a few minutes is enough to derail an entire fire chain. For weeks, fighting has unfolded in windows of 10 to 20 minutes, where artillery, reconnaissance, and infantry only generate effect when detection, confirmation, and firing align perfectly. Because of that, the Russian command post cannot remain static. Each nighttime relocation follows a familiar cluster of vehicles: KAMAZ trucks, Ural trucks, command vehicles, communications relay vehicles, and generator trucks, moving along dirt roads, avoiding main axes, spacing out, and maintaining maximum radio silence. In their thinking, the less they emit, the harder they are to see, and silence maintained long enough equates to safety. But a command post cannot exist on movement alone. The moment the convoy is forced to halt and establish a new site, an unavoidable sequence begins to run. Generators increase load, cooling systems spin up, communications equipment is erected and brought online, dropping the entire vehicle cluster into a target exposure window lasting only a few minutes. At that point, the radio is unnecessary. Heat and movement are enough. Ukraine was not hunting the convoy. They were waiting for the exact moment the command post began operating, the moment when a system believed to be invisible is forced to light itself up. The Russian convoy departed its staging point in standard mechanized formation. KAMAZ and Ural vehicles carrying command, communications, and power assets held intervals of 50 to 120 meters, stretched along a narrow dirt road behind the line of contact. The formation moved evenly, without bunching, without acceleration, spaced just enough to avoid being caught in a single strike while still on the move. Radio communications were cut almost entirely, but diesel engines still had to hold load, APUs still supplied power, and cooling systems still ran. Against the cold night backdrop, each vehicle left a stable thermal signature. Each gear change or rough patch extended the infrared trail by several dozen meters before it slowly faded. Radio silence does not erase traces, it only changes their form. Above, Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs held observation positions outside short-range air defense envelopes. At lower altitudes, medium-range UAVs shadowed the route and handed off targets segment by segment. There was no moment of loss of contact. On the ground, reconnaissance confirmed vehicle count and roles, then fell silent. The decision was clear. While moving, the formation remained dispersed. Once it stopped, everything would collapse into a single point. A few minutes later, the Russian convoy left the main axis and halted at the forest edge, 20 to 22 kilometers from the front line. This is a distance that mobile brigade-level command posts typically consider deep enough to deploy without falling into direct fire envelopes. Tree cover blocks optical observation, terrain limits low-altitude UAV flight, and 2 withdrawal directions are kept open. From a layout perspective, the stop point looks perfect, but only if the opponent still has to look with their eyes. Once the wheels stop, the entire vehicle cluster shifts state. A Ural 4320 configured for communications moves into the center of the formation, VHF and UHF antenna masts raised according to procedure. Besides it, a KAMAZ carrying a field generator increases the load to supply power. Against the cold night backdrop, the generator's thermal emission swells into a stable hotspot on infrared imagery. a clear indicator of a command post beginning operations. This is the most dangerous phase. The system is powered on, but not yet stable. Communications are being established. The security ring is closing. Short-range air defense assets and man-pads have not yet taken up fully protective positions. In the first 2 to 4 minutes, the entire vehicle cluster is forced to remain stationary, packed tightly around key components, placing all command functions onto a few of the thinnest links. Ukraine waits precisely for this phase. An FPV attack drone approaches at very low altitude, skimming the forest edge to minimize exposure time, and drives straight into the antenna cluster and communications equipment block. The impact is clean and decisive. The antenna mast collapses. Cables are ripped free from equipment racks. Relay units are destroyed on the spot. Power remains, vehicles remain, personnel remain, but the link is severed cleanly at the throat. The effects appear almost immediately. The deployment sequence stutters for 5 to 10 seconds, enough to break the rhythm. Several command displays shut down abruptly, and status indicators fail to illuminate in the correct order. The command post is forced to switch to backup communications channels with low bandwidth and high latency. Orders arrive fragmented, must be repeated and reconfirmed, and synchronization between elements breaks down. Meanwhile, protective vehicles react to what they can see in front of them. Short-range air defenses fire sporadically. Electronic warfare vehicles increase jamming power. But these reactions are no longer coordinated from a unified center. They occur locally, out of phase, unable to lock down the surrounding space. At this point, the command post has not been physically destroyed, but its command function has been cut. The system no longer operates as a unified whole, instead fracturing into isolated reaction points. And once that state forms, the decisive shift has already occurred. The convoy is no longer a command post in the process of deploying, but a target that has been softened, desynchronized, and standing still at the worst possible moment to absorb the next strike. When the antenna mast collapses, the Russian vehicle cluster remains stationary, roughly 20 to 22 kilometers behind the line of contact, a familiar distance for brigade-level command posts, but also a distance Ukraine has calculated very carefully. On infrared imagery, the center of the formation stands out clearly. A HIMARS generator truck holding a high load, forming a stable thermal hotspot. Immediately adjacent is the core command vehicle under canvas, where movement density is noticeably higher than in the surrounding vehicles. For formations that have been tracked before, this layout almost never changes. Ukrainian UAVs maintain a continuous track, while ground reconnaissance confirms the critical point. After the relay strike, the vehicle cluster has remained stationary for more than 90 seconds and has not yet dispersed. For a mobile command post, that is a dangerous threshold. Once deployment has begun, mobility degrades rapidly. The decision is made the moment both data sources align. Fire is called from HIMARS, using GMLRS munitions with a range exceeding 70 kilometers, but at this distance, flight time is reduced to only 30 to 40 seconds, insufficient to move a command cluster that is mid-deployment. The strike follows a familiar principle. Disable function, no need to level. The first round lands in the power zone, where generators and electrical distribution points are concentrated within a radius of 10 to 15 meters. The second round presses close to the center of the formation, where the core command vehicle is attempting to restore communications. For a vehicle cluster that has compressed itself into a narrow footprint, that is sufficient to strip operational capability. The shock transmits through the ground before the blast arrives. A brief, decisive flash. Generators drop load, systems shut down simultaneously, command vehicle displays go dark and do not come back on. The vehicle hulls may still exist, but the ability to issue orders is completely severed. The reaction of Russian protective forces arrives exactly 1 beat late. Man-pads and short-range air defenses fire sporadically. Electronic warfare vehicles push jamming power higher, but there is no longer a center to coordinate them. Fires appear locally, failing to form a unified counteraction. Disintegration follows quickly. Vehicles still capable of movement pull away from the hot zone, spacing opening from 50 to 70 meters to over 200 meters in just 1 to 2 minutes. There is no formal withdrawal order and no order to hold position. On the Ukrainian operational map, the marker changes state. Silent, non-responsive. Along the forward line, Russian units feel the abnormal delay. Fire support requests lag by 5 to 10 minutes, coordination tasks are left hanging, and UAVs no longer receive new tasking. The engagement ends not with a dramatic spectacle, but with a cold reality. In only a few minutes, the command system of an entire sector has been removed from the operational loop, not because it was erased, but because it was struck at the exact threshold, at the exact moment when it was forced to stand still. When the smoke settles, what Ukraine gains is not merely a confirmed hit, but a command vacuum. A brigade-level command post positioned 20 to 22 kilometers behind the line of contact. The element that maintained rhythm for the entire sector is removed from the operational loop in just a few minutes. The remaining forces still have vehicles, artillery, and manpower, but they no longer function as a system with a center. The damage does not lie in a handful of vehicles struck, but in the cost of rebuilding the system. Losing a brigade-level command post forces Russia to establish a fallback CP farther to the rear, triggering the redeployment of dozens of logistics, communications, and security vehicles within 24 to 48 hours, with operating and sustainment costs estimated in the millions of US dollars, not including losses caused by operational disruption. In the 30 to 60 minutes following the strike, the command rhythm visibly slips. Fire support requests arrive 5 to 10 minutes late, enough to miss 10 to 20-minute fire windows along the forward line. Coordinated missions are left hanging, UAVs continue flying on inertia, artillery still fires at local targets, but no one is left to bind these actions into an effective sequence. The critical point does not lie in the level of physical destruction on site. It lies in operational order and stolen time. Cutting the relay first, then striking the core, shifts the entire command chain off by one beat, and in modern warfare, a single beat is often enough to lose the initiative. It is not about stronger weapons. It is about a faster timeline. This engagement ends in the coldest possible way. No need to sweep, no need to occupy, only to render a system unable to function in any meaningful sense. Russia executed many familiar steps correctly, moving at night, shutting down communications, changing routes, spacing formations, but they could not avoid the requirement that cannot be bypassed. To exist as a command post, they must stop, power up, erect equipment, and enter a state that can be read. And all it takes is that window of a few minutes for everything to be locked. What is unsettling is that it happens in the rear area. The rear is no longer the rear. A distance of 20 kilometers is no longer a safety buffer when the opponent can track by heat, fuse data, and call precision strikes within a very short time frame. The remaining tactical question is therefore clear. Disperse command to reduce the risk of being cut by a single strike, or concentrate command to preserve rhythm and decision speed. In a battle space where every system leaves operational signatures, the issue is no longer concealment, but whether you can operate faster than the opponent.